getting a new technology or new use or new understanding, and then you can put it in both lab and the project. So maybe just keep the deadline, for example, for 2 first months, and then let the project start, and then move the deadlines only for the third and the fourth.
Okay.
Probably most of the people are ready with the first, and struggling probably with some of the issues from the second.
So
I don't know how many people even started third or the fourth one. So maybe make some kind. But on this Google sheet that's on the with repositories.
yeah,
it's not that filled.
yeah.
And actually, some of the repositories didn't seem to be working with all the checkout issues. So, yeah, is it like that we are publishing only when it's ready and passing all the tests? Then it's ready for a review.
Yeah.
By a review, you mean that everything is working?
Someone
push it to this Google doc.
Yes.
Before everything is working.
Yeah. You can put stuff into the document before everything is working. But most people don't. Most people wait until it's working, and when they ask for review, then they put stuff there. And some people don't put stuff there until it's been reviewed. So you only put stuff there after it's been reviewed, right? So there are 3 categories of people.
Yeah. So it's not consistent, and it's difficult to maybe to find out what's the status actually for the whole class.
Yeah,
on the different labs.
That's right. So okay, so let me do this. So with the labs, use Google Sheets. We can say, so out of the 3 options, put it as early as possible, put it when you're ready for review, put it after you have stuff reviewed. The last one is the least desirable. The second one is fine, because whoever is reviewing you needs to get the URLs and stuff. So, you have to have that, at least the second one. Should we say, do it as soon as possible? So as soon as you have a repo, you just put the repo there. Yeah?
I would go for the second option, because I'm not sure if I'm getting enough people that I sort of want to check mine, or that there are others that I can check, that I'm friends with. So I would like to have like a list of those that are ready, so that I can check for them, even if like for instance.
So like this.
But what then with if you, I don't know, open the starting review and suddenly find out that it's not everything on the right place.
Yeah.
Then it's not reviewed, and you just have to pick up another one you want to review, and so on. So it's okay just to go and check how the people work all the time, and it also takes a little bit of time installing and
that's
checking
true.
the code and everything, and then you somehow, at least I can speak only for myself, that I expect that if there is something published for review, then it's ready for review.
Yeah.
That was what I was suggesting.
Yeah.
Like if it's ready for review, then it should be on the like it says that.
Yeah.
And then if it isn't, if you find that it isn't ready, then you should tell them this isn't finished.
Yeah.
I don't mind giving a feedback if somebody needs to address an issue that probably maybe I did, so I can help. No problem with this. But how much time do we need to spend?
So
other people's code.
So I was sort of for the review process. I am imagining that what happens is you agree to review somebody's work, and you can clone the repo and check the code. So that requires some work on your part, right? You have to do that the URL is working and the code is there, and you can build it, and you can sort of tick the test in the emulator or on your phone that it's actually working. If some things are not working, you can just kind of indicate, okay, point, fourth bullet point is not ticked because it's not working. And you can do it offline, or you can do it through the sheet. You can put comments there that I'm not ticking you because of the fourth bullet. You have to fix it, or somehow you have to give the feedback so they fix it, right? There is no shortcut. Like you actually have to do the review, the check. The alternative is that you meet and you're not doing any work, but you ask the other person to show you the code, show you how it runs, and kind of do the check with you, right? This way, it might be a little bit simpler. It occupies two people, not one person, but it might be a little bit simpler because that person will already have the code on their laptop and their phone or in the emulator, right? So it's a little bit faster, but it takes two people. So if it's like 10 minutes versus 5 minutes, then there is no benefit because now the 5 minutes is spent by two people, right?
You can do it in for example, Thursday's lab.
You can do it in Thursday's lab, of course. You should use Thursday's lab to do that if you want. So the lab sessions are partly for that, that we are all together in the same room and you can do that, right? And it's even better if there are some edge cases because you can involve us. You can say, I'm not sure about this bullet point if I could tick it off or not. And then we can just say, yeah, tick it off, or no, it has to be fixed, right? So border cases, of course, the easiest way to deal with them is on Thursdays. Okay, so how about the deadline? I kind of like the idea of going midway, so like having the deadline still 18th for the first two labs. I hope people will, like, if you don't have those two labs done by 18th, then that's a serious problem, and that shouldn't be a lot of constraint for the web students because I'm sure you are within the two labs already. It might be with the third and fourth that you need a little bit more time. So I'm okay with extending the deadline, although it says strictly no extensions here.
For the first two labs, it's no extension.
Yeah. So lab submission deadline, lab 1, 2, 18th of March, and labs 3 and 4. What?
June. August.
Next year.
Voluntary.
April 18th. One month extra. Or early May, like first May.
Early May, the course finishes.
Just before.
So 18th is Sunday, and then there is Easter on 1st of April, which is also Sunday. We go to work when?
Tuesday.
Tuesday. Right. So let's make it Thursday then. So 5th of April.
But if you make it Sunday, then it's probably the last chance to get a help is on the first election.
Yes. If you haven't done it through Easter, then you're screwed. Huh?
The border cases.
What do you think, Christopher?
Totally screwed.
anyone doing expecting much after the 18th is screwed. Because no extension. You're becoming soft.
I know. Let's delete that. Yeah, so where are the dates here? Yeah, so after Easter. So those who are really late, they still have Easter to catch up, but that's it. Okay? Okay, if you struggle, let us know earlier. If you struggle with the first two laps, we should know about it right now. In my mind, everybody done already the first two laps. In my mind, you're all working on the fourth lap. So, okay, short break, 5 minutes.
One thing about the break.
Okay, so my microphone stopped working. Okay. Yes. Internationalization. So for the labs, we didn't enforce any internationalization. It's an optional feature. For the project, you will have to do that. You will have to make your app work with more than one language. It is actually more complicated than just adding a language to your application, and we will right now kind of discuss what's involved and why even bother, why we're doing that. So what is internationalization and what is localization? Any ideas? What do you think is the difference?
Internationalization is allowing for several nationalities to use the app, and localization is for a specific country or region.
Yeah, you kind of you are onto something. So internationalization is from the point of view of a developer, or how to manage the process in such a way that we can support multiple nationalities, multiple localizations. And then localization is a process of actually making it for a particular locale, for a particular country, right? So yeah, the world is a complex place. There are multiple people living in it, some with disabilities. And also it's kind of a diverse in terms of cultural heritage and kind of a perceptions. So the process of writing or modifying a program so that it can use multiple languages without requiring further source code changes is what? What's that definition of? Internationalization, exactly. There is another term which is called globalization, can best be thought of as a cycle rather than a single process. So to globalize is to design and develop methods for a product in advance, keep in mind a multicultural audience, avoid increased cost and quality problems, and smooth the localization effort for each region or country. So the term internationalization, which we started with, is sometimes replaced with the term globalization, which is sort of similar, but internationalization was always considered a kind of a process, whereas here they say it's more like a cycle. And the cycle kind of looks like this. So you have the kind of the internationalization process, you have the localization process, and they kind of inform each other. So all your difficulties in localizing something feed back to how did you internationalize your process? How did you make it possible for localization, right? So it is sort of, you always start with this. You always start with building kind of a mechanisms and framework which allows you later to localize it. And then while you're localizing it, you're modifying and changing the process of which you have in the first place to make it even easier to localize it. So it's sort of, it's not a closed loop. It's like, it is a closed loop, but it kind of cycles. So why we do internationalization? Well, we do that to support global markets, to remove some cultural assumptions, country or language specific content, to make it easier and cost effective to localize the product later on. So any hard-coded strings, any hard-coded things, you have to kind of plan that we may need to change it if we want to go to that particular country or to that particular locale. So localization is the actual adoption of the product for the specific market. Can you have localization in a single country for multiple markets? Yep. In Norway, you have two languages. You can have an app which supports both, right? You can have a localization which supports kind of hearing disabled people better with the visual feedback. You can have a UI which supports vision impaired people better, right? So you can localize the product to have the functionality the same, but the interface and the communication with the user is different. So there is another term that something was multilingualized, and you shorten it according to the pattern to M17N. All those patterns come from counting the number of letters which are between M and N to sort of do the thing. So you have localization, internationalization, and globalization. So this is like a minimum amount of work. So you're basically saying we don't really have internationalization in a process. We just support multiple languages. Only that. The icons stay the same. The color stays the same. We don't change the content based on the culture. We just change the language, the labels of the language, right? And that's the minimum. Like that's the simplest. Internationalization involves more. It involves adapting the icons, adapting the the language usually is left to right or right from left, so that's included in the multilingualized versions, although they sometimes cover only languages which go from left to right, and you only change the text. So, multilingualized software supports multiple languages for display and input, but has a single UI language which cannot be changed after installation of the software. So any software packages that you know which are multilingualized, like Windows, for example, they don't really change the UI. It's basically the same from country to country. Color schemes are the same. It looks exactly the same. The only thing which changes is the text, right? So you may say, well, Windows is not truly internationalized. It's multilingualized. And why is that? Well, from one hand, it's cost effective. If Microsoft creates all the booklets and all the stuff for the operating system, and it's all exactly the same, has the same icons, the same look and feel, only thing different is the text. It's easier to sort of print the new versions for the new language. If the color schemes are different, if the layout of the icons are different, and if the everything is kind of specific for that culture or for that market, then it becomes extremely difficult to maintain it, to work with it. And also if you move between versions, like in many countries, people are using sort of English, like, in Poland, a lot of people use English Windows. And in Norway, same, like a lot of students use the English version of Windows. Then if the Norwegian one is completely different to the English one, you would really have hard time fixing your grandparents' computers because the icons would be in different places, everything is different. But if it's exactly the same, it's just the wording which is different, and you can read both languages, it's kind of easy to migrate from one to the other. Yeah?
I read something yesterday about Google Maps having the borders go in a different area, judging if you're in India or in Chinese computer, because they're disputed.
Yeah, exactly.
Does that fall into like internationalization?
It does. Yeah. It does. So as we are discussing, multilingualization is just the tip of the iceberg. Things like that kind of contribute to internationalization. You have to take care of it. So legal constraints and kind of disputed borders and so on are part of you localizing a product. So if you have a product for a Chinese market, you have to respect their worldview and where they think the borders are. If you're doing it for a different market, you don't have to follow that, right? So it's with China is the same with Tibet. They say there is no separate country; it's part of China. You cannot have Tibet as any borders or anything there. And it's similar with India and other countries with disputed borders. So what do we have to take into account? We have to take into account the text, but that's relatively straightforward, but it is still pretty complicated, right? So if you ever try to make a UI kind of good with different languages, you will notice that some languages are very lengthy compared to others. So the description of your icon in one language is very short and succinct. In your other language is kind of very long. How you deal with that? Well, it's kind of difficult. You will also notice that you have to kind of compensate for the writing directions. So alignments of elements and kind of the presentation depends on whether you're doing left to right or right to left or top to bottom or bottom to top. I have a lot of problems with entering, and it's very trivial, with entering the decimal place. So in some languages, the decimal place is called a dot, and in some it's comma, right? So if I want to say a floating point number, which is 7, with like 7 Norwegian krona with 0 ore, I could do this, or I could do this, right? And the funny thing is that one of them often is used as a delimiter of thousands. If you have long numbers, so if you want to write 1,000,000, usually you have kind of something like this, saying, okay, it's 1,000,000 krona, and you have those 2 dots here, and then you say, okay, and 0 cents or whatever, right? So every time I'm filling up the travel claims with our system, and I say I paid a ticket to go to Gardermoen, and the cost was 310 Norwegian krona, the system thinks that the 0 thing here is the delimiter, and I end up with 31,000 Norwegian krona when I do that. So the browser locale and the system locale are kind of misinterpreting the comma, and like few times I submitted it with the bill for like 50,000 Norwegian krona for going to Gardermoen.
Did they pay?
No, they fix it. I was actually worried that they will pay and then I have to pay back, right? So yeah, things like that are important, and plural forms. In English, it's quite simple, like most things, and in Norwegian as well. Most things are kind of easy to make a plural out of, and they're quite regular, but a lot of languages are kind of cumbersome. So then if you are localizing the language and you have a singular form or plural form, it gets kind of complicated. Input, same. How you do the graphical representation of the text, kind of iconography. The direction from right to left. So there are some examples of Arabic. And then there is a lot of extras, like borders, how the identity numbers look like. If you need a national identity number, for different countries, how you deal with titles. The funny thing, for example, in English is that you say doctor, and you shortcut it to dr, right? So you say dr dot. It's a shortcut for doctor. In Polish, when you have a shortcut which ends on the letter which the shortcut is for, it's kind of illegal to have a dot, right? So if I were to do that, you cannot have this dot, because that's not grammatical, because doctor finishes with R, and then the dot represents that it's a shortcut and it continues, but it doesn't because it finishes on R. So it's kind of, again, like when I type in Polish, I have to remember to remove the dot, and if I type in English, then the spell checkers always add the dot, right? Trivial thing, again, but culturally dependent. Currency symbols, how you do the account balances with the commas and so on, how you do metrics, paper sizes, and so on. There is a lot of things you need to take into account, right? So there is a large number of factors that need to be taken into account when you're doing kind of localization. And those factors feed into your internationalization process to help you do the localization later. So how you represent calendars, how you represent quotes, how do you quotes in Norwegian normally in a text? In English, you usually say, blah, 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 and you have quotes like this. In some languages, you start from the bottom, blah, 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 and you end on the top, right?
Yeah, and left quotes and right quotes and things like that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Complicated. So then there is a regulatory compliance, right? You have to comply with the locale you are doing your app for. So you have to, respect their laws and respect the specifications and kind of policies that they have. And, your example, disputed borders shown on the map. So you cannot show, Kashmir as an India because it's criminal. It's actually a criminal offense, right? So there are some things you can easily do in Norway, but you cannot do in other countries because that would be considered actually illegal. So how you know all of that? Well, it is a complicated process. The other complicated thing is iconography, right? So we often say it's easier to deal with icons because they are kind of international. Well, they're not really. Different things mean different things in different countries. So a funny thing, I had a student who came to a conference in Poland 2 years ago. And in Poland, when you go to a toilet, you see two symbols. One is round and one is triangular. And he asked me, okay, which one is the female toilet or a male toilet? Is it clear, obvious to you which one is which? No. Exactly, right? Because you don't use those symbols. In Poland, it's like trivial. It's obvious, right? How is it in Germany? Yeah. So we use the round one for female and the triangle for male. Yeah. Kind of, yeah. For most people, it's kind of arbitrary, right?
It's intuitive, right?
It's intuitive to Polish people somehow, but like for most other countries, it's not. It's an icon. It's obvious, right?
You're showing those that are on the bottom of on the screen.
Say it again?
That's those icons on the bottom of the screen.
Yeah.
Instead.
So, that's much more obvious, right? Yeah.
But there's also not international but intergenerational issue that I encountered. I mentioned it before. I'm not sure you guys, the saving icon, what does it usually depict? If you save something in Word, what does it depict?
Floppy disk.
Exactly. Do you guys actually know floppy disk?
Have you?
Yeah. That's good. That's at least one generation saved. I had literally a class of students that didn't know. Just press that square and it will save the text. They didn't know what it actually meant.
What the floppy disk was.
Well,
Yeah.
the essence there is, the message is, things may change over time as well. So the meaning of symbols may
The
not become
symbol should be like a USB flash.
exactly.
Yeah.
There's a new idea of getting away from the hardware representations to model that with the downwards arrow, for example.
Yeah.
But that's a stylistic thing. But those are important as well over time.
Exactly. So, it is kind of complicated. It's easy to say, okay, what those two are, right? What is this one for? It's an elevator, probably. Yeah. So, taxi, airport, maybe. What's this one?
Locking your car.
Yeah. This one?
Christmas presents.
I don't know, okay, post office, kind of ambulance or Red Cross or some pharmacy maybe, a phone booth. Do we have phone booths anymore? What is that for?
They're pretty rare.
Restaurant, okay. Some are kind of, in our culture, you may depict them. What's that? Ferry terminal or, watch out for big ship crossing. All right, so mobile devices. Well, those problems crop up, and we've been dealing with them for years. So both Android and iOS, they have kind of internationalization mechanisms built in. So they deal with some of that stuff by the mechanisms that are kind of built into the platform. And you do use them because you want to reach out wider audiences. You want to be able to localize your product easily, right? So far, you haven't been using those mechanisms. You've been hard-coding strings, probably, and so on and so forth. But you can use some of the mechanisms which are built into the platform to take advantage of it when it comes to do localization, right? When you're doing a single language and you do those efforts, there's a bit of extra work that you have to do. But then when it comes to localizing your product, it's much easier. If you haven't done this effort up front, you will have to do it later when you're localizing the product. So Android and iOS will select resources based on the locale on which the phone runs automatically. So you can pre-prepare a number of things for the app to pick from the resource folder depending on the locale you are in. And you can do that. You've already seen it doing it for example, landscape and portrait mode. It kind of works in exactly same way, but instead of changing like land for landscape options, you have language-specific locale which you attach to your resources, and then the resources will be picked accordingly. So for example, there is a file and values called strings.xml, which you've worked with because it contains the label, the name of your app. Why it's in the file? Well, it's in the file because you can have something called res values en, and that's English specific, and you can have res values and some other locale, pt for Portuguese or bk for bookmall, I think, and have your strings localized to that language. So if someone fires up your app with that particular locale, the different strings will be loaded depending on the locale they have picked. So it's a kind of a runtime thing. You don't need to recompile your app. You just need to have those resources available, and when the app loads, it will load with the appropriate locale. And if the person or the user changes the locale on the phone, the app will automatically change the strings which are kind of used in your app. So this is super simple. All you need to do is you need to have kind of a default file, which is, if I need an English version and I don't have values.en, I will use this one. If I need a bookmall version and I don't have the one for bookmall, I will use that version. So it's kind of a fallback. It's a default one which is loaded if the app is not localized. Sometimes people ask me, should that be Norwegian or should that be English? It kind of depends. If your app primary target is Norwegians, then you can make the default into Norwegian, right? But if you publish your app into multiple countries, chances are the other countries which will load your app, the people over there will not speak Norwegian, but it's higher chances they will speak English. So then you probably should fall back as a default into English, right? But with German, if your primary audience is the German-speaking countries, then maybe the fallback is German, like if you're covering Austria, Germany, Switzerland, and so on, right? Most people pick the default as English, yeah.
How do you cover the different word versions of English? Is that the end underscore US?
Yeah, that's right. Yes, exactly.
Hyphen, not underscore, right? Or
I think it's underscore. Yeah. The same works for all the resources folders that you have. So you can have different icons, you can have different layouts, you can have different animations, you can have everything different depending on the locale you need. And you can differentiate it by the locale, or you can differentiate it by other factors. So if you need, you can kind of localize all those resource files that you have. You will still need the default one, the fallback one, for all the locale that don't fit the pattern. So the Android runtime will try to load the matching one. If it cannot find one, it will load the default one, right? And if you don't have the default one, Android Studio will complain. It will say, well, we need the default fallback, yeah?
Is the name of the folder sort of like a variable you can put whatever? Can the English one be called whatever?
No.
Okay, so it is a default value.
So there are some patterns. So for values, so one of the folders is called values. Yeah, it's not listed here, but it's for the strings, and for arrays, you have values, right? So then the pattern is for language, you say -en, and then for versions of language, you would say underscore particular US or what have you, or NZ for New Zealand. And then the most matching one will be matched. you can say -land for landscape mode and portrait mode. You can have different text or different resources. Sometimes the text is too long in the portrait mode, so you want a kind of abbreviation on something if you're using portrait, and the text in the landscape can be full, right? So you can use that. So land is the pattern here. You can differentiate it. The funny thing is you can really differentiate it by the operator of the mobile network the user is using, right? So if someone is using telecom in Norway, you can have them shown different icon and different text than someone is using another operator. So you can differentiate the resources even by the prefix of the mobile number, right? So if you know the user is a telecom user, you can customize the UI for a Norwegian telecom user, right? Which is kind of, you know, weird level of detail, but you can do that as well.
Could work with like advertisements.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And also for some predefined selections. If I have a list of predefined things, I may have telecom specific things up front and then other things later. And then for other users, you know, other way around or something. So how do you do alternative resources? Well, you basically create a subfolder of the resources with that suffix. And then you specify what you need. What will happen if I have a key, let's say app name, and I am in France, and I have the French strings. So the Android runtime will look up the key, and if it finds it, it will use it. If the Android runtime goes there to that folder, which exists, goes to strings, but it doesn't have that key, it will fall back to the default, which is in the other strings file, right? Android Studio was kind of, will give you warnings that you have some keys somewhere, but not somewhere else, right? But sometimes, like for example, when you're doing English for a particular country, most of the things are the same, and the app name is the same, right? Like if you're localizing your app and you call your app something, I don't know, like you call it app, right? The name will be the same in all the languages, so you don't really need to localize it on all the strings.xml files. You just have it in one. Why? Because if I need to rename my app, then I will have to go to 20 different files and to rename it, right? If it's the same name, it kind of you keep it in a single place. But Android Studio will kind of bug you that you haven't localized a particular string which you have in default but not in the other one, right? And you cannot have a key which is only in localized version but not in the default one. That cannot happen, right? Okay, drawables the same. You see, we can have landscape, which I already told you about. We can have small for small screens. You can have different icons depending on the resolution of the screen, and you can have something which is specific for people using a stylus, right? So if your device supports a stylus, you may have different UI or different way of dealing with it. So this is like distinguishing by resolution, by orientation, and by additional features. This is by the language. Yeah, so then NO is the bookmall. For the Nynorsk, you have to do something else. The Nynorsk, I think, is BK or something. It's, I don't remember. You would have to, you have to check it.
It's Anand.
Okay. And then you can have something like this, and this is a MCC code which specifies a particular mobile network. You can Google the operator codes, and you can differentiate text or icons based on the operators' MCC codes, right? Those are published. So Telecom will have some, and then Vodafone will have some, and so on. Okay. There are tutorials online. So how to do that on Android and how to do that on iOS. There are different localization strategies that you will use. And you can do, so you can do that based on the kind of predefined locale which are inside the region or inside the resource folders, or you can do it kind of runtime. You can check what locale user is using to kind of do those runtime checks in your code. So sometimes like normally what you do is you leave the locale selection to the operating system. So you don't mess up with the default of what the phone is. But for testing purposes, a lot of groups, when they did their project, they wanted to have a selection in the app. So inside the app, you can change the language of the app, in which case you would have to do a lot of runtime checks, right?
We have to go to a meeting.
Okay. So it's really easy to test it on the emulator because you can just flick the locale in the emulator and it will change the layout and everything that needs to be changed. So you can kind of easily test it, but you can vary the resolution and so on. But you need to do it on the real device as well. As I said, the devices differ, the resolutions differ, and you will have some surprises there. So then we have kind of 2 slides about the checklists. You can read them. It's for the project, so you will kind of go through the checklists. Yeah, why are we doing it? So the following 4 slides are kind of arguments for why we actually care about internationalization and why we're preparing the app to be localized. And it kind of boils down to a couple of issues. One is the legal constraint. Like if you want to publish something in China, you cannot really do illegal things there. So you have to be aware and kind of do it properly. The other one is why you want to do your app in China. Well, it's a huge market. Maybe you can monetize better. You can get some value out of the work that you're doing. And doing it yourself is kind of really hard. You really need a certain set of skills. So you usually need to do that with experts. Yeah, I mean, if you are a small studio, you're kind of a couple of guys doing some apps, you may not be able to do that. So Google and Apple, they offer sort of localization and services which kind of help you to do that and help you to provide particular checklists for a particular country that you need to do that for. Okay, so that's kind of a quick rundown through the internationalization and localization processes. Any questions about that? Have any of you tried to make your app in 2 languages, in Norwegian and English? So for the labs, you don't have to do that, but you can try. Yeah.
That's from experience point of view. Sometimes you have those really odd translations, right? So they really don't fit the layout and the context of the application you're interacting with. And that oftentimes comes if the translation has been done by someone else than the app developer. So they actually don't see the user interface, and totally something else comes out in the end, right? So my experience was I had to translate the driver for one of the first textile printers from Brother from English into German, and they didn't give you any context. You didn't, because the thing was still under development. They just gave you an Excel list with the English term, and you need to translate it. But on the display, it absolutely didn't seem to make sense anymore because you're just literally translating without contextualizing it.
Yeah.
So it's super important if you do it, actually go through the app in that different language and see if it makes sense, and ideally find the native speaker and see if it makes sense to them, and not just to Google Translate. It's easy to just run everything to Google.
That's right. So you can run through Google Translate, but it's usually context-free. It usually is kind of out of context translations. So they will be broken. Some native speaker will need to fix it. But it's a good starting point most of the time. Yeah.
For now, but if you want to go serious.
Okay. No questions? Okay, so we will finish for today.